He is 3 weeks old and an enemy of the state. Traitor. Money-grubbing Zionist. That's what the government will call this 3-week-old Soviet Jew. Gershon's father comforts him, protects him, but only for now. Like his parents, he will live in constant danger, surrounded by anti-Semitism which the government creates and promotes. They have applied to emigrate and were refused. They are captives. They are Refuseniks. Gershon's brother and his friend study Hebrew in their apartment. Only 2 students in the class. It's safer. The boys concentrate on their lessons, but they know that any time the KGB, secret police, can break in, confiscate the books, arrest their teacher. Hebrew is condemned by the Soviets, who call it a tool of the enemy, Israel. Hebrew must be wiped out. Arrest the teachers on trumped-up charges of anti-Soviet behavior. More innocent Jews thrown into Soviet prison cells. Evgeny Lane wasted a year of his life in prison and in Siberian exile. He had been studying Jewish history with friends when the police burst into the apartment, roughed up the students, demanded identification papers, and singled Lane out for arrest. This dramatic picture was secretly taken through the courtroom window during his trial. It was a show trial, with Lane's guilt already determined. He had become too vocal in fighting for his legal right to study and to emigrate. Arresting Lane might silence the rest of Leningrad's Jews. Yakov Gorodetsky, like Evgeny Lane, is a fighter for Jews' legal rights. The official Soviet newspaper Pravda accused Gorodetsky of using freedom of culture as a smokescreen for Zionist infiltration. The press called him a Zionist agent who disseminates anti-Soviet literature. The KGB has warned Yakov to stop his Jewish activities. His demand that the Soviets obey their laws and allow Jews to repatriate to their homeland, Israel. He is threatened and vilified by his own government. And yet he, and hundreds of his friends, signed a petition which they sent to the highest authority in the Soviet Union. They asked to return home after 2,000 years of homelessness and persecution. Our desire to leave the USSR is our demand to go home. They publicly protest, but privately, at home, they are cautious. Refuseniks' apartments are bugged by the KGB, a microphone hidden in the ceiling behind a light fixture in the telephone. A bookstore. Like everything else in the USSR, it is owned by the government. Anti-Semitic posters are for sale here, like this one showing ugly Jewish stereotypes and an evil, bearded Zionist studying plans of concentration camps they will build in Lebanon. And on another poster, we see Hitler and Israel, old friends, walking arm in arm. The Soviets will never forget that the Nazis killed 20 million Soviet citizens during World War II. And here, in this poster, which anyone can buy in a bookstore, Hitler is graphically linked with Israel and Jews. Soviet citizens are told to hate and distrust Jews. In books and magazines, the Soviets read that Zionism is a global conspiracy whose aim is to overthrow the Soviet system. Children's magazines are filled with anti-Semitic articles. Members of the military, scientists, even railroad workers find anti-Semitic articles in their publications. Everything that Soviet citizens read is published by the government. Everything Soviet families see on television or hear on radio is produced by the government. The Soviets spell out an official policy and create a carefully controlled climate which the typical Soviet citizen never questions. Independent thought is forbidden. Soviets do what they are told to do. They are told what to think and whom to hate. They are told to hate Judith Bialy, a metallurgical engineer, until she applied to emigrate and was fired from her job. Jews who apply to emigrate usually lose their jobs, and unemployment is called parasitism, a punishable crime. Refuseniks become desperate for any work they can find. A scientist becomes a street cleaner. A mathematician washes windows. An engineer will be a night watchman. Then the KGB demands that the Refusnik be fired again, overqualified for the job. Judith's teenage son Sasha fights his own anti-Semitic battle. He used to play basketball at school, but not anymore. After a long losing streak, he was thrown off the team when a fellow player suggested that perhaps it is the Jew who is bringing us bad luck. Jews have a long history in Russia, and so does anti-Semitism. The Romanov Tsars tried for centuries to baptize the Russian Jews, or starve them to death by excessive taxation, or murder them in pogroms. After the Russian Revolution toppled the Romanov monarchy, Jews found themselves faced with another enemy, the atheistic Communist Party, which controls the state and demands complete, unquestioned obedience. The state, not God, is the highest authority. Jewish tradition, which had sustained Jews for centuries, was wiped out. Generations of Soviet Jews had little or no knowledge of Judaism. They were the Jews of silence. Until 1948, when the State of Israel was born. In Moscow, thousands of Jews jammed the streets to welcome Golda Meir, Israel's ambassador to the Soviet Union. The Jews of silence found their voices in Golda's presence. And then, in the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, Israel's victory became their victory. Thousands applied to emigrate. Some were able to leave. Others became refuseniks. Lev Goldfarb, Joseph Erlin, and Armen Khachaturian are internationally recognized scientists, but outcasts in the Soviet Union. They are all refuseniks. Lev Goldfarb, on the left, worked on a Nobel Prize project. He is a medical doctor who was a senior researcher at the Academy of Medical Science. Immediately after Lev and his family applied to emigrate, he was forbidden to treat patients, forbidden to publish and to attend professional conferences, even forbidden to speak to former colleagues. Now, in spite of the personal risk, he has become the doctor to his fellow refuseniks. They come to me, he says, because they trust me. I am one of them. Their health gets worse every day. The stress, the frustration. They never know what lies ahead, not only for themselves, but for their children. Jewish parents watch helplessly as their children grow up in a world of double standards, one for Jews, one for non-Jews. Dima Kagan was expelled from school. He missed his exams while he was sick. Other students can make up the tests, but not Dima. He is Jewish. Avram's appeal on behalf of his son was futile. The iron fist of the Soviet government has unlimited authority to frustrate and punish Jewish parents and their children.
This is my prayer. This is my prayer. This is my prayer. Give me strength, their weight to bear. Give me strength, their weight to bear. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow. Hold fast to dreams.
Pavel Akun is 13 years old. and has been a Refusnik for 10 years. What are you going to be when you grow up? Will you be a lawyer or a businesswoman? You have no choices. You have no real control over your future. It is already determined. Your grandmother lives in Israel. The Soviets prevented your family from emigrating with her. You are a gifted young pianist, but your grandmother will never hear a note you play unless you are allowed to emigrate. Lev Blitzstein lives here alone. The Soviets separate Jewish families as punishment for daring to try to emigrate. Lev has not seen his wife or children for over 10 years. When they applied for exit visas and were refused, Lev divorced his wife so that she and the children might live in freedom. A divorce born only of love. Lev had prayed he would be allowed to follow his family into freedom. He is still in Moscow, alone, with only photographs of his wife, his children, and grandchildren whom he has never seen.
Carry on, my sweet survivor. Carry on, my lonely friend. Don't give up on the dream. Don't you let it end. Carry on, my sweet survivor. Though you know that something's gone, for everything that matters, carry on. Carry on, my sweet survivor. You've carried it so long, so that it may come again. Carry on. Carry on.
Naomi May cannot study at Moscow University. Jewish students, intelligent and able, are forced to take separate examinations in which they are purposely failed. An entire generation of Jewish young people are denied advanced education. They are faced with a vocational dead end at a time when most young people are preparing for productive and challenging futures. Ivri, Jew. From the age of 16, Soviet citizens must always carry an internal passport, identification with their name, address, birth date, and line 5 reserved for nationality. A Soviet born in Kiev is of Ukrainian nationality. A Soviet born in Moscow is a Russian. But a Jew, regardless of where he or she was born, is identified as Ivri, Jew. Ivri when he wants a job, when he needs an apartment, when he applies to a university. Jews are made visible in a country which despises them. They are hated outcasts, but their government refuses to let them repatriate to their homeland, Israel, a right guaranteed by international agreements which the Soviets have signed. Jews cannot reunite with their families outside of the Soviet Union, a right guaranteed by the Helsinki Accords, which the Soviets signed in 1975. Soviet Jews are kept highly visible. They are publicly condemned, and yet they cannot leave. Jews must be kept in, hated, but locked in. Why? The Soviets use Jews as bargaining chips in international relations. They are scapegoats blamed for the country's economic problems. In newspaper and magazine cartoons, Jews are associated with Israel, whom the Soviets consider an enemy. Anti-Semitism is a valuable tool of the Soviet government. Anatoly Sharansky, accused of high treason, has been in prisons and labor camps since 1977. Sharansky is tortured and beaten, barely alive. Still, he hunger strikes to demand his legal rights. A visit from his mother. A letter from his wife, Avital, in Israel. Anatoly has spent 185 days in an isolation cell, 15 days at a stretch, in an unheated box like this, without blanket or warm clothing, and fed only once every other day. A 3x4 cell, not high enough to stand up in, not long enough to lie down. Anatoly Sharansky's mother waits. Joseph Begun is serving his third prison term. His crime, teaching Hebrew. During pretrial detention in prison, he refused to work on Shabbat. He was punished. A prison official sheared off Joseph's beard, the last visible evidence of his piety. Yuri Tarnopolsky, 3 years of hard labor. Yuri was thrown in a punishment cell for breaking a rule. He put a book on his bed. Najda Fradkova, 2 years in a labor camp near the Arctic Circle. She was found guilty of being unemployed while being tortured in this psychiatric hospital. No one knows how many mentally healthy Jews are in Soviet psychiatric institutions. Yuli Edelstein, 3 years in the Soviet Gulag. The KGB planted drugs in his apartment. Yuli and all Jews were accused of using drugs during Shabbat rituals. Joseph Berenstein, 4 years behind bars. Arrested and viciously attacked with broken glass during his first night in prison. Joseph is now almost completely blind. And Zachar Zunshine writes to his wife, "Dear Tanya, the train is floating down the track. Today, I am being transferred to another labor camp." Labor camps and psychiatric hospitals have not silenced the Soviet Jews, nor has the shadow of the KGB. Soviet Jews will never give up, and neither must we.
Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die.
Gershon now lives in Jerusalem. His parents were part of the Jewish resistance movement. They never stopped working for their right to emigrate, and neither did we. Today, they are free. The nightmare of captivity is behind them, but their friends are still trapped. We worked for this family's freedom. We work for all Refuseniks, and will not give up until every Refusenik is on the way to a new life, without fear, without the KGB, without the specter of prison cells and Siberian exile. From where do the Soviet Jews, the Refuseniks, draw the strength to survive? From the dream of a brighter future, from the spiritual bond of a 4,000-year history, and from the knowledge that their struggle and their suffering is a focus of worldwide concern.